The silence was the first sign. It was a dense, unnatural quiet, the kind that absorbs sound and leaves a ringing in the ears. Liam's boots, usually a heavy, reassuring thud on the hardwood floor, seemed to make no noise at all. The air in their small house was cold, still, and carried the faint, cloying scent of a perfume he did not recognize. It was the smell of departure. He stood in the entryway, the grime of the construction site still under his fingernails. A fine layer of concrete dust settled on his shoulders. A weariness that went bone deep had been his constant companion for months, but this was different. This was the heavy stillness of a vacuum, of a space that has been emptied of its life. If stories about resilience, the price of loyalty, and the kind of love that survives the wreckage speak to you, stay with me. He walked into the kitchen. The source of the wrongness lay on the granite countertop, a single sheet of expensive cream-colored stationery placed with cruel precision next to the coffee maker. His wedding ring sat atop it, a perfect mocking gold circle holding the paper down against a non-existent breeze. For a moment he just stared at it, his mind refusing to process the scene. It was a tableau, a carefully constructed piece of art designed to inflict maximum damage. He could almost feel her standing there, placing the ring just so, her brow furrowed in concentration, not with sadness, but with the focus of a curator arranging an exhibit. The thought was a shard of ice in his gut, his hands, calloused and rough from years of gripping rebar and tools, felt clumsy as he lifted the ring. It was cold. He slid the note out from under it. The handwriting was hers, a familiar, looping script that suddenly looked alien, sharp. It was not a long letter, it was a statement of terms.
"Liam," it began, devoid of any warmth. "I can't do this anymore. I need more than this life, more than this house, more than what you can give me. Julian has offered me a future, a real one. Tonight is my promotion party. His party for me. I don't want you there. It's better to make a clean break. I've taken my things. The lawyer will be in touch about the house. It's better this way, you'll see. Sarah." He read it 3 times, the words blurred, the ink seeming to bleed into the fibers of the paper. A promotion party? He knew about the promotion. He had signed the authorization himself 3 weeks ago. Sarah worked in sales for a major materials supplier, a company that did millions of dollars in business with his firm, Apex Construction. Her manager, a vice president named Julian Croft, had submitted her for a promotion to senior account manager for the Apex portfolio. The file had come across the desk of the executive vice president of development, his desk.
He remembered the name, Sarah Connolly, and smiling faintly. He never mixed his professional and personal lives. Almost no one at Apex knew his wife worked for a vendor. He had reviewed her performance metrics. They were excellent. She was a sharp, ambitious salesperson. He had approved it based on merit, without a second thought, without a single phone call. He had been proud. He had been planning a celebratory dinner for her, waiting for her to tell him the good news herself. The irony was a physical blow, a vicious, gut-wrenching punch that stole the air from his lungs. She was celebrating her promotion, a promotion he had granted her, with the man she was leaving him for. She saw him as the man who came home covered in dust, the man whose hands were never quite clean, the man who understood steel and concrete better than he understood her cocktail parties. She had no idea that he was the silent, unseen executive in the glass tower, the one whose signature could make or break careers like hers. She had mistaken his quiet nature for a lack of ambition, his love for the tangible world of building for an inability to navigate the abstract world of power. He had let her believe it. It had been easier. He sank onto one of the kitchen stools, the note crinkling in his tightening fist. The secondary burden, as if the first were not enough, crashed down on him. Chloe, his younger sister. 17, volatile and already adrift, she had been living with them for 2 years, ever since their parents' car had been found wrapped around an oak tree. He was her legal guardian, her only real family. And Sarah, in her clean break, had left her behind as well, another piece of a life she no longer wanted. A stack of bills on the counter caught his eye, a small, menacing mountain of envelopes. Sarah had managed their finances. A cold dread, colder even than the ring in his palm, began to creep up his spine. What else had she left behind for him to clean up? The house was a tomb. Her closets were empty, her side of the bathroom stripped bare. All the small personal artifacts that had made the space theirs were gone. Only the furniture remained, the shell of a life. He walked through the silent rooms, his footsteps finally echoing in the emptiness. He felt like a trespasser in his own home, a ghost haunting the wreckage of his own future. The promotion party would be in full swing by now. He pictured it, the clinking glasses, the false laughter, Sarah standing beside Julian, radiant and triumphant. And him, here, in the quiet dark, holding the evidence of his own obsolescence. He was the foundation she had used to build her new life, and now that the structure was complete, the scaffolding was being kicked away. He did not feel anger, not yet. That would come later. For now there was only the crushing, monolithic weight of the silence and the cold, hard certainty that everything he had been building had just been condemned. The weeks that followed were a grey smear of existence. Liam operated on a kind of grim autopilot, a machine performing its functions without consciousness. His body went to work, his hands directed the complex ballet of cranes and concrete pumps, his voice gave orders on job sites that were heard and obeyed. But his mind was a vacant lot, swept clean by the shock. He moved through his days in a state of profound numbness, a buffer of insensate fog between him and the world. The smells of diesel, wet cement and welding ozone, smells that had once felt like life itself, were now just flat, meaningless data. Home was no longer a refuge, it was a hostile zone. The emptiness Sarah had left behind had metastasized, breeding chaos. Dishes piled up in the sink, monuments to meals he could not remember eating. Dust bunnies gathered in corners like malevolent growths. The bed remained unmade, a permanent, rumpled testament to his solitary nights. He would come home from 12-hour shifts, the physical exhaustion a welcome bludgeon against the encroaching thoughts, and simply collapse onto the sofa, often waking hours later with the television screen flickering over his face, the house as cold and silent as when he had left it. He was neglecting himself, his body running on stale coffee and the dregs of adrenaline. He lost weight, his clothes hanging loosely on a frame, already hardened by physical labor. His face grew gaunt, his eyes shadowed with a fatigue that sleep could not touch. The secondary burden, Chloe, was a storm front of her own. Her grief over their parents' death had always been a sharp, angry thing, and Sarah's departure had ripped the wound wide open again. She saw it as the ultimate abandonment, a confirmation of her deepest fear, that everyone eventually leaves. Her rebellion, once a simmering adolescent current, erupted into a raging fire. She missed her curfew, then stopped acknowledging it altogether. Calls came from the school about her cutting classes. Her grades, once respectable, plummeted. She would storm through the house, a whirlwind of slammed doors and muttered accusations, her anger a shield against the pain he knew she was feeling, the same pain that was hollowing him out. He tried to talk to her, but his own emotional reserves were bankrupt. His words came out flat and useless, architectural plans for a bridge over a chasm far too wide. He would sit at the cluttered kitchen table, trying to help her with homework, and the numbers and words would swim before his eyes. He was a man who could calculate the load-bearing capacity of 1,000 tons of steel to a fraction of an inch, but he could not find the right formula to connect with the grieving girl across the table. The silence between them grew as vast and empty as the space in his marital bed. He was failing her, and the knowledge was another 100-pound sack of cement added to the weight already crushing his shoulders. The breaking point, when it came, was not a dramatic explosion, but a small, pathetic collapse. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn, the sky the color of dirty dishwater. He was at the site of a new corporate headquarters, a 50-story behemoth of glass and steel. A critical concrete pour for the 10th floor slab was going wrong. The mix was curing too fast, the pressure in the pump lines was fluctuating, and a $100,000 operation was seconds from turning into a catastrophic, unsalvageable block of stone. His radio crackled with panicked voices. He was in the thick of it, shouting orders, his mind racing, trying to solve 3 interlocking problems at once. His phone rang, a shrill, unwelcome intrusion. He ignored it. It rang again, insistent. It rang again. He finally ripped it from his belt, barking a "what" into the receiver. It was Chloe's principal. Her voice was strained, formal. Chloe had been caught trying to shoplift a bottle of vodka from a convenience store during school hours. The police were there. She was being defiant. Could he come down to the station? The two pressures, the frantic chaos of the job site and the sickening lurch of failure at home, collided inside him. The concrete, the police, the pump lines, his sister. The panicked shouts on the radio merged with the principal's disappointed tone in his ear. For a single, terrifying second, the world went silent. The scaffolding in his mind, the structure that had been holding him together through sheer force of will, buckled. He managed to delegate command of the pour to his foreman, his voice a strange, hollow rasp. He stumbled away from the noise toward his truck, the principal's words echoing in his head. He drove, not to the police station, but home. He did not know why. He walked into the house, the same cold silence greeting him. He went to the refrigerator to get a bottle of water, his hand shaking. He pulled the door open, and a gallon jug of milk, perched precariously on the edge of the shelf, tipped. It fell, hitting the linoleum floor with a sickening, explosive crack. White liquid sprayed across the cabinets, pooling on the dirty floor. The sight of it, the sheer, stupid, mundane mess of it all, broke him. It was the final straw, the failed concrete pour, the phone call, the empty house, the years of grinding work, the betrayal, the grief, all of it coalesced into that one pointless, spreading puddle of milk. A sound tore from his throat, a raw, ragged noise that was half sob, half scream. He slid down the kitchen cabinets, his back hitting the doors with a hollow thud, and landed in the sticky, spreading mess. He put his head in his hands, the rough texture of his palms scraping against his face, and for the first time since he had found the note, he wept. It was not a quiet grief. It was a storm of racking, gut-wrenching sobs, the sound of a man who had finally, completely, hit rock bottom. He did not know how long he sat there, on the cold kitchen floor, surrounded by the wreckage of a simple gallon of milk that felt like the wreckage of his entire life. The world had narrowed to the sticky cold seeping through his jeans and the burning in his throat. The storm of sobs eventually subsided, leaving behind a hollow, aching emptiness. He was just a man in a ruined kitchen, a captain who had gone down with a ship he did not even realize was sinking. He heard the front door open and close, followed by tentative footsteps. He did not look up. "Liam?" Chloe's voice was small, stripped of its usual defiant armor. He remained motionless, his head in his hands. He could feel her presence in the doorway of the kitchen, her hesitation. He heard her sharp intake of breath as she took in the scene. Him, on the floor, the exploded milk carton, the air thick with the sour smell of his despair. He waited for the sarcasm, the anger, the inevitable, "What's your problem?" But it did not come. Instead, he heard her walk slowly across the room. The floorboards creaked as she knelt down, her knees just inches from the spreading white puddle. "Are you okay?" she asked, and the genuine fear in her voice was a knife to his heart. In that moment, she was not a rebellious teenager or a burden. She was a scared kid who had already lost her parents and was now watching her only remaining anchor come apart at the seams. He finally lifted his head and looked at her. Her face, usually a mask of sullen indifference, was pale, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored his own. She was looking at him as if he were a building she had always thought indestructible, now shuddering on its foundations. That look was the catalyst. It was the jolt of electricity to a stopped heart. It was the sight of the one person who depended on him completely, seeing not a guardian, not a brother, but a broken man. In her eyes he saw the terrifying endpoint of the path he was on, utter collapse. And with that vision came a spark, a tiny, defiant ember in the cold ashes of his spirit. He would not do this to her. He would not become another person who failed her. He would not sink. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "No," he said, his voice raw. "But I will be." It was a promise, made more to himself than to her. He looked from her frightened face to the mess on the floor, and for the first time he saw it not as a symbol of his failure, but as a starting point. This was the bottom. There was nowhere to go but up. He would stop sinking, and he would start building. The first step was concrete, and it was sacrificial. The mountain of bills Sarah had left was not a mountain. It was a whole mountain range of consumer debt, credit cards he did not even know she had, all maxed out. His salary from Apex was substantial, but it was being bled dry by interest payments and penalties. He needed capital. He needed a foundation. And there was only one thing of value he had left that was truly his. The next Saturday, he took Chloe with him to the garage. Under a dusty tarp sat his father's legacy, a 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1. He and his dad had spent 5 years restoring it, a painstaking labor of love. Every bolt was torqued to specification, every wire was perfectly laid. The engine, a 4.28 Cobra jet, gleamed under the bare bulb of the garage. It was more than a car, it was a collection of memories, of greasy hands, shared laughter, and his father's patient lessons about mechanics and life. Selling it felt like cutting off a limb. He explained it to Chloe, simply and without emotion. "We need to clear the ground before we can build," he said, pulling back the tarp. She just nodded, her eyes fixed on the gleaming chrome. She understood. She had spent weekends in that garage, too. The man who came to buy it was a collector, a man with soft hands and a clinical appreciation for the car's perfection. He offered a fair price, a number that was large enough to be a lifeline. As the Mustang was loaded onto a flatbed trailer, Liam felt a sharp, physical pain. He was selling his past to pay for his future. He watched it drive away until it was just a red speck in the distance. When he turned back, Chloe was standing beside him. She did not say anything, but she slipped her small hand into his large, calloused one. It was the first time she had done that in years. With the debt cleared and a small cushion of cash, the pressure lessened from a crushing weight to a manageable load. The next step was at work. He started arriving an hour earlier and staying 2 hours later. He devoured project files, financial reports, supply chain logistics. He was no longer just overseeing the physical construction. He was learning the architecture of the business itself. His weariness was still there, but now it was purposeful, the ache of a muscle being strengthened, not the fatigue of decay. It was during this period that he truly encountered Elena. Elena Rostova was one of Apex's most brilliant and difficult young architects. She had a reputation for being uncompromising, a purist who fought for her designs with a ferocity that intimidated contractors and managers alike. Their first significant interaction was in a contentious project meeting for a new residential tower. Liam, in his capacity as EVP, had proposed a change to the bracing system on the upper floors, a cost-saving measure that used a standardized, prefabricated truss system. Eleanor had stood up in the middle of the meeting, a sheaf of papers in her hand. "Mr. Connolly, your proposed change is efficient, but it is wrong," she said, her voice clear and without deference. A nervous silence fell over the conference room. "It will create a harmonic resonance issue in high winds. The building won't fall, but the occupants on the top 10 floors will feel a persistent, nauseating vibration. It will be an acoustic and structural failure." She laid her calculations on the table, a complex and elegant series of equations that proved her point. Liam felt a flush of annoyance, the sting of being publicly corrected. But as he looked at her work, the annoyance was replaced by a deep, grudging respect. Her logic was flawless. Her foresight was brilliant. She had not just seen the building, she had listened to it. He studied her for a long moment. She met his gaze without flinching, her expression not triumphant, but expectant. She was not trying to win a battle, she was trying to protect the integrity of the structure. In her, he recognized the same fundamental instinct that drove him, the builder's imperative to get it right. "You're correct, Miss Rostova," he said, his voice cutting through the tense silence of the room. "My proposal is withdrawn. We will proceed with your original design." He then turned to the stunned project managers. "And I want Miss Rostova to review the structural harmonics on all tower projects currently in development." He saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes, quickly masked. She had expected a fight, a defense of ego. He had given her an acknowledgement of competence and more responsibility. As the meeting broke up, she approached him. Her usual sharp demeanor softened slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Connolly." "You were right," he said simply. "Good work is good work." It was not a moment of romance or even friendship. It was a moment of professional alignment, a quiet recognition of a shared ethos. But as he walked back to his office, he felt something he had not felt in a long time, a sense of partnership. He had cleared the ground. He had laid a new, painful cornerstone. And now he had found an ally, another architect who understood that the strongest structures are built on a foundation of unyielding integrity. The turning point was complete. The long, slow process of building had begun. The first year after the collapse was a blur of dust and debt, a relentless grind of 16-hour days and sleepless nights. Liam existed in a perpetual state of motion, a machine fueled by black coffee and sheer will. He was a presence on every major job site, his truck a familiar sight at dawn, his silhouette a fixture against the setting sun. He learned the names of every foreman, every crane operator, every concrete finisher. He learned the rhythm of his company not from spreadsheets, but from the ground up, from the scent of curing concrete and the percussive symphony of steel being bolted into place. At home, he and Chloe found a new, fragile rhythm. He learned to cook, producing a rotation of simple, functional meals. They ate together at the kitchen table, the silence no longer hostile, but simply quiet. He checked her homework. She started showing him her sketches. It was not perfect, but it was a start. It was a foundation. The second year, the dust began to settle. The frantic energy of survival cooled into the focused intensity of ambition. Liam's deep dives into the company's operations had given him an unparalleled understanding of its strengths and, more importantly, its weaknesses. He identified logistical bottlenecks, outdated procurement processes, and inefficient divisions that bled money. He wrote meticulous reports, not with the aim of pointing fingers, but of proposing solutions. He designed new systems with the same precision he would use to design a support column, reinforcing the company's structure, making it leaner and stronger. His mentor, the gruff, old-school CEO Marcus Thorne, began calling him into his office for more than just project updates. He would pepper Liam with questions, testing his knowledge, his nerve. He saw the fire that had been lit in the younger man, the raw grief that had been forged into tempered steel. By the third year, the blueprints on his dining table were as much for his own life as they were for Apex Construction. He had enrolled in night classes, pursuing an executive MBA. He would leave a construction site at dusk, covered in the day's grime, and sit in a sterile classroom, learning the language of finance, of mergers and acquisitions, of corporate strategy. He traded the physical tools of his old life for the abstract ones of his new reality. He learned that a well-written contract could be as strong as a steel girder, that a shrewd negotiation could be as impactful as 1,000 tons of concrete. He was building a different kind of empire now, one of influence and control, but the principles were the same. Start with a solid plan, use the best materials, and never, ever compromise on the integrity of the foundation. His ascent within Apex became undeniable. Marcus Thorne, seeing the result of Liam's quiet, relentless work, made a bold move. He handed Liam control of the company's most troubled division, urban redevelopment. It was a corporate graveyard, a portfolio of stagnant, money-hemorrhaging projects that everyone else had written off. "This is a tomb or a throne, Liam," Thorne had said, his voice a low gravel. "Your choice." Liam chose to build a throne. He moved his office from the executive floor down to the division's cramped, dispirited headquarters. He brought Elena Rostova with him, making her his chief architect. Together they were a formidable team. He was the pragmatist, the strategist, the man who understood the hard realities of cost, labor, and logistics. She was the visionary, the artist, the one who could see a shining jewel where everyone else saw urban decay. They spent countless nights in that cramped office, surrounded by blueprints and zoning maps, arguing, debating, and creating. They tore apart the old, failed projects and redesigned them from the ground up. He found the financing, she found the soul of the buildings. Their relationship evolved in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, over shared containers of lukewarm takeout and endless cups of coffee. It was a slow-burn romance built not on grand gestures but on a foundation of deep, unwavering mutual respect. One night, huddled over the plans for a new community center in a blighted neighborhood, she had asked him, "Why do you do this? You could be on the top floor, comfortable. Why get down in the dirt with a failing division?" He had looked out the window at the sleeping city. "My father was a mechanic," he said, his voice quiet. "He taught me that you can't fix an engine just by listening to it from the driver's seat. You have to get your hands dirty. You have to be willing to take it apart to understand why it's broken." He looked at her, and she saw the ghost of the broken man he had been and the formidable man he was becoming. "Everything in this division, this city, it's all just a big, complicated engine, and I know how to fix it." In that moment, she did not see a boss or an executive. She saw a builder. She reached out and put her hand over his on the blueprint, a simple, grounding touch. "Then let's get our hands dirty," she said. From that point on, they were partners in every sense of the word. She saw the steel spine beneath his quiet exterior, and he saw the passionate heart beneath her professional armor. She helped him navigate the treacherous politics of the corporate world. He championed her most ambitious designs, finding a way to make them reality. Their love story was written in the margins of contracts and the lines of blueprints, a structure they were building together, slowly and deliberately. His life with Chloe solidified into a true family. He attended her parent-teacher conferences, no longer a harried guardian, but a proud, invested parent. He discovered her passion for graphic design and helped her get an internship with Apex's marketing department. When she was accepted into a prestigious art school in New York, he felt a pride so fierce it almost brought him to his knees. He had not just saved her, he had helped her build her own future. He had become a father, a role he had never expected but had come to cherish more than any professional title. 7 years after he had sat broken on his kitchen floor, Liam Connolly was a different man. He stood in his office, a spacious, minimalist room of glass and steel on the 48th floor of the new Apex Tower, a building he had overseen from conception to completion. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his hands clean, the calluses smoothed away by years of holding pens instead of power tools. The only remnant of his old life was the way he would sometimes tap his fingers on his desk, a rhythmic, testing sound, as if checking for structural integrity. His hair was shorter, with distinguished wings of grey at his temples. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a formidable calm. The haunted look in his eyes had been supplanted by the cool, assessing gaze of a man who sees the world in terms of loads and stresses, assets and liabilities. He was no longer just a builder of structures, he was an architect of power. His urban redevelopment division was now the most profitable in the company's history. He had not just built a throne, he had built an empire. And he had done it all quietly, relentlessly, and without ever forgetting the bitter taste of the wreckage from which he had started. The past, he had learned, was never truly gone. It was just a dormant fault line waiting for the right pressure to shift. The tremor came on a crisp October afternoon in the form of a phone call. He was in a meeting reviewing the final schematics for a waterfront revitalization project when his personal assistant, a ruthlessly efficient young woman named Anya, entered the room and placed a note discreetly on the table in front of him. It read, "Sarah Connolly on line 2. She says it's personal and urgent." Liam felt a flicker, not of emotion, but of cold recognition, a circuit closing after 7 years. He had not heard her name, not seen her face, not received a single word since the day he had found her note. He had assumed she had vanished into the glossy, successful life she had chosen with Julian Croft. He excused himself from the meeting, his face an unreadable mask. He walked back to his office, the thick carpet silencing his footsteps, and looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the city sprawling below him. He could see 3 of his own buildings from here, monuments of glass and steel piercing the sky. He took a breath, then picked up the receiver. "This is Liam." "Liam, it's me, it's Sarah." Her voice was thinner than he remembered, brittle. The confident musical lilt was gone, replaced by a strained, hesitant tremor. It was the voice of someone unaccustomed to asking for anything. "I know," he said. The silence that followed was heavy. He let it stretch, a tactic he had learned in negotiations. The person who fills the silence is the one who is losing. I need to see you," she finally said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Something's happened. I'm in trouble, Liam. I'm in real trouble."
He felt nothing. No pity, no anger, no curiosity. It was like listening to a business proposition from a company he had already decided not to invest in. "My schedule is very full," he said, his tone flat, professional. "Please," she whispered, and the sound was raw, desperate. It was a sound he recognized. It was the sound of rock bottom. Just an hour, for old time's sake. Old time's sake. The phrase was so absurd, so utterly disconnected from their reality, that it was almost clinical. He considered saying no, considered hanging up and having Anya block her number permanently. But that was not his way. A builder does not leave a loose end untied. A structure with a single weak point is a compromised structure. "Tomorrow, 4 o'clock, my office," he said, and hung up before she could reply.
She arrived 15 minutes early, a clear sign of her desperation. Anya showed her into his office, and as she stepped across the threshold, Liam saw the full extent of her decay. The 7 years that had forged him into something stronger had eroded her completely. She was still beautiful, but it was a frayed, worn beauty. Her expensive clothes, a designer dress that would have been the height of fashion 3 seasons ago, hung on her slightly too thin frame. Her face was etched with fine lines of anxiety, her eyes darting around the expansive office, taking in the quiet display of power and success. This room was larger than the entire ground floor of the house they had once shared. She tried for a smile, a pathetic, trembling thing that did not reach her eyes. "Wow, Liam, you've done well for yourself." He did not stand. He simply gestured to one of the leather chairs opposite his vast desk. "Sarah, what do you want?" The directness of the question seemed to shatter her rehearsed composure. Her face crumpled. Tears, real or manufactured, welled in her eyes. She launched into a long, rambling story of victimhood. Julian, it turned out, had not been the financial genius she had thought. His success was a house of cards, built on fraud and risky investments. It had all come crashing down 6 months ago. He had been arrested. The accounts were frozen. The cars were repossessed. The lavish apartment was gone. He had abandoned her, she claimed, leaving her with nothing but debt and humiliation. She was a victim, just as he had been. She had been naive, blinded by his charm. She had made a terrible mistake. Liam listened without a single change in his expression. He let her talk, his gaze steady and unnerving. He was not listening to the words, but to the structure of her plea. It was poorly built, full of emotional appeals and logical fallacies, designed to elicit pity. He remembered a time when a single tear from her could have undone him. Now her performance was just data. When her story finally wound down, her sobs subsiding into sniffles, she looked at him with pleading, hopeful eyes. "I have nothing, Liam," she whispered. "I'm staying on a friend's couch. I can't find a job. I have nowhere to go. I was hoping you could help me, for the man you used to be." He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped on the polished surface of his desk. "The man I used to be is gone, Sarah," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of stone. "You saw to that. Is that all?" Her face hardened, the mask of the victim dissolving to reveal the familiar, sharp entitlement beneath. She had played her first card, and it had failed. Now it was time for the threat. The quiet, broken man she remembered was gone, but she still believed the man in front of her could be swayed by the right kind of pressure. She had miscalculated, assuming his calm was a sign of lingering affection or weakness, rather than what it truly was, the utter absence of feeling. She was about to discover the difference between a man who is broken and a man who has been rebuilt. Sarah's performance of remorse evaporated like mist in a harsh sun. The soft, pleading lines of her face hardened into something sharp and ugly. The victim was gone, replaced by the predator. She straightened up in the chair, her spine stiffening, and a cold, familiar glint appeared in her eyes. It was the look she used to get when a sale was not going her way, the moment before she went for the jugular. "No, Liam, that's not all," she said, her voice dropping the pathetic whisper and taking on a hard, metallic edge. She reached into her expensive but slightly scuffed handbag and pulled out a crisp, folded document, placing it on his desk. "My lawyer sends his regards." Liam did not touch the paper. His eyes flicked down to it, then back to her face. "You have a lawyer?" he asked, his tone neutral, merely observational. "Of course I have a lawyer," she snapped, emboldened by his perceived lack of reaction. "And he's very good. He pointed out a rather significant oversight on your part. We never actually divorced, Liam. We separated, but the paperwork was never finalized." She leaned forward, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "Do you know what that means? It means that under the laws of this state, everything you have built over the last 7 years, this empire," she waved a hand around the office, "is considered marital property. This company you're a partner in, your stock options, your portfolio, this very building, I am legally entitled to half of it." She sat back, letting the weight of her threat settle in the quiet room. She expected shock, anger, panic. She expected him to start shouting, to call her names, to plead. It was what the old Liam would have done. He would have been devastated, overwhelmed by the injustice of it. But the man sitting opposite her simply stared at her, his expression unchanged. "He thinks I have a strong case," she continued, pressing her advantage. "A very strong case. A public, messy, and very, very expensive lawsuit. I can't imagine the board of directors at Apex would be thrilled about their star executives' dirty laundry being aired for the world to see. Reputations are so fragile. It could do a lot of damage to your career, to the company's stock price." She was laying out her terms of blackmail as if it were a sales pitch. "Or," she said, her voice softening into a parody of reasonableness, "we could settle this quietly. A private settlement, a one-time payment that reflects my contribution to your early success and my share of our shared assets. Then I go away, and no one ever has to know." Liam remained silent for a long moment. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and what he saw was a stranger, a desperate, grasping stranger who was trying to leverage a past he had long since buried. She mistook his silence for consideration, for fear. She had no idea that he was simply allowing her to construct her own gallows to hand him the rope to even test the knot for him. He had been preparing for this moment, or a moment like it, for 5 years. Not out of paranoia, but out of prudence. A builder always plans for the worst-case scenario, the earthquake, the fire, the 100-year flood. Sarah was his 100-year flood. At his request, Eleanor had been in the room the entire time, sitting quietly in a chair in the corner, reviewing a set of architectural drawings on a tablet. Sarah had initially dismissed her as an assistant or a new girlfriend, a decorative piece of his new life. Now, Sarah glanced at her, a flicker of contempt in her eyes. "I think your associate should probably leave. This is a private family matter." "Elena stays," Liam said, his voice calm but absolute. "She is my partner." He used the word deliberately, letting its dual meaning hang in the air. "She has a right to be here." He finally reached forward, but not for the lawyer's letter. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Anya, please bring in the files, the Connolly personal file." Anya entered a moment later, silent and efficient, and placed a slim, dark blue document folder on the desk in front of him. Sarah watched, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face for the first time. This was not part of her plan. Liam opened the folder. He took his time, his movements deliberate, precise. "You're right about one thing, Sarah," he said, not looking at her. "A lawsuit would be messy, and reputations are fragile." He slid a single document across the vast, polished expanse of the desk. It stopped directly in front of her. "However, your lawyer seems to be working with incomplete information." Sarah looked down. It was a court document, a finalized divorce decree, stamped and certified by the state. The date on it was from over 5 years ago. What is this?" she stammered, her voice losing its confident edge. "That is our divorce," Liam explained calmly. "I filed for it a year after you left, on the grounds of abandonment. The court summons and all related notices were sent via certified mail to your last known legal address, the multi-million-dollar penthouse you shared with Julian Croft. You, or someone at that address, signed for them. When you failed to appear or respond, the divorce was granted by default. It has been final for 62 months. According to the law, our marriage ended the day you walked out, and our assets were divided as they were on that day, which means you are legally entitled to exactly half of the debt you left behind, which I paid off, and nothing more. You have no claim on me, my assets, or this company." The color drained from Sarah's face. She stared at the paper as if it were written in a dead language she could not comprehend. Her entire strategy, her entire hope, had been built on a foundation of sand, and it had just been washed away. I never got them," she whispered, her mind reeling. "That is not my concern," Liam said, his voice devoid of sympathy. He was not finished. He reached into the blue folder again and pulled out a second, much thicker file. This one was bound and labeled Internal Audit, Project Nightingale. He slid it across the desk. It landed with a soft, heavy thud. What is that?" she asked, her eyes wide with a new, dawning horror. Project Nightingale was the internal code name for Apex's primary materials supplier, the company where you and Julian Croft worked, Liam explained, his voice as cold and hard as polished concrete. "About 4 years ago, our accounting department noticed discrepancies, inconsistent billing, substandard materials being delivered at premium prices. So we launched a quiet internal investigation. This," he tapped the thick report, "is the result." He let her absorb that for a moment. "It's a very thorough report. It details a systematic scheme of kickbacks, wire fraud, and embezzlement, all orchestrated by Julian. His entire operation wasn't just a house of cards, it was a criminal enterprise. We were his biggest client, so we were his biggest victim." He paused, letting the silence stretch again. He looked directly at her, his gaze pinning her to the chair. "The investigation also uncovered accomplices, people who signed off on falsified shipping manifests, who approved fraudulent invoices. Your signature," he said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper, "appears on 17 of those documents." Sarah looked as if he had physically struck her. A choked, strangled sound escaped her lips. "We were building a case to terminate the contract and pursue criminal and civil charges," Liam continued, his voice relentless. "But then, as you said, Julian's other ventures collapsed. His other creditors moved faster than we did, and the whole thing imploded. The authorities were already involved. Apex decided it wasn't worth the negative press to join the dog pile. So this report," he tapped it again, a final, definitive sound, "was never filed. I held it." She stared at him, the full, terrifying scope of his foresight finally crashing down on her. He had not just survived, he had anticipated her. He had watched her from a distance, not as a wounded ex-husband, but as a strategic opponent. He had held the weapon that could destroy her, and he had kept it in reserve, waiting. "Why?" she breathed, the word barely audible. "As a courtesy," he said, the words dripping with ice. "A final one. A builder always keeps a fire extinguisher handy, just in case." He leaned back in his chair, the picture of calm, absolute power. "You came here today with a threat. Now I am giving you a choice. You can walk out of this office and disappear from my life forever. Or you can proceed with your baseless, extortionate lawsuit, and if you, or any lawyer representing you, ever contacts me, my family, or my company again, a copy of this full, unredacted report will be forwarded to the district attorney's office. Given that you were a material witness and a signatory in a federal fraud case, I imagine they would be very interested in hearing from you. The choice is yours, Sarah, but I would advise you to choose wisely." He stood up, the first time he had done so since she entered. It was a clear, final dismissal. "Now you are no longer my concern. Please leave my office." Sarah stared at the two files on the desk, the divorce decree that severed her past, and the audit that threatened her future. They were twin tombstones for the life she had tried to reclaim. She had come here to pick the pockets of a ghost, only to find he had become a god, and he had built his new Olympus on a foundation she could never touch, protected by walls she could never breach. The man she had discarded as rubble had rebuilt himself into a skyscraper, and she was nothing but a speck on the pavement below, looking up in terror. Utterly, completely defeated, she rose on trembling legs and, without another word, walked out of his life for the last time. Liam did not watch her go. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, it was as if a massive, invisible weight he had been carrying for 7 years simply dissolved into the air. He did not feel triumph, not a shred of vengeful satisfaction. He felt only a profound, quiet lightness. It was the feeling of a demolition crew after the last wall has fallen, the dust beginning to settle, the site finally cleared for new construction. It was the feeling of peace. He sank back into his chair, a long, slow breath escaping his lungs. It was over. Truly, finally over. The last ghost had been exorcised. The final debt of his old life had been paid. Elena rose from her chair and came to stand behind him. She placed her hands on his shoulders, her touch warm and grounding. She did not speak. She did not need to. She had been his partner in this, the silent witness to the final closing of a painful chapter. Her presence was a testament to the new life he had built, a life based on shared struggle, mutual respect, and a love as strong and true as the steel frames of his buildings. He reached up and placed his hand over hers, lacing their fingers together, the rough, calloused hands of the builder meeting the elegant, precise hands of the architect. Together, they were whole. Later that evening, the city was a tapestry of glittering lights spread out below them. They stood on the private observation deck of the Pinnacle, the 50-story signature tower that had been his and Elena's first major project together, the building that had cemented his legacy at Apex. The autumn air was cold and clean, carrying the distant sound of city life. Chloe was with them, home for the weekend from her university in New York. She stood between Liam and Elena, her face illuminated by the glow of a tablet she held, excitedly showing them a preliminary design she had created for a new community arts initiative. Her voice was full of passion and confidence, the ghost of the angry, frightened girl she had once been, long since vanished. Liam looked from the sprawling urban landscape he had helped to shape to the two women beside him, He saw the city lights reflected in Elena's proud, loving eyes. He saw the boundless future in Chloe's animated face. He had once thought his empire was the concrete and steel, the rising stock prices and the growing portfolio. But he had been wrong. This was his true empire, this small, unbreachable circle of love and loyalty. This family he had built from the wreckage. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder, her gaze following his out over the endless city. He felt the warmth of her, the solid, reassuring presence that had become his foundation. The past was a closed book, a finished blueprint filed away in the archives. The future was an open vista, waiting to be built. He put his arm around her, pulling her closer, his other hand resting on Chloe's shoulder. The three of them stood there for a long moment, a quiet silhouette against the glittering skyline, a testament to resilience, to patience, and to the enduring power of building something that lasts.
Let's go home, he said.